Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast Strategy Edition. I'm Ian Hartitz. Joining me as always, the one, the only, Dwain the Rock McFarland. Dwain, we talked about doing some of these podcasts all summer. It's August 10th. I think it's finally time. Let's help show some people how to freaking win a fantasy football championship.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of this was based on some of the other strategy stuff that we've talked about, and then just questions people have had, like, well, what if you start this way? What if you start this way? And so I just thought it'd be a good idea to just map a few of those out for folks, because the way you start your draft really does determine the next steps that you're thinking about as you're going through it and what might be the potential targets, all those sort of things. So yeah, you know me, I'm always down to talk strategy, down to talk drafts. Love it.
If you guys have checked out Dwain and I's, we've had 3 drafts now in the Football Guys Championship. As we kind of talk to our strategy without it, you will notice pretty quickly that, this is one of those things where, Dwain, let's let everyone say it with us. Every season is different and every draft is a dynamic living organism. So yes, today we're going to talk about the running back start. And we'll be clear plenty of times throughout this, but this is just based on if the draft falls the way you can feasibly get this done with great players and still have plenty of other time and options throughout the draft to fill out the rest of your roster. So Dwain, while we really, this strategy is great sometimes, other times, and you had another article come out, I believe, yesterday about the wide receiver start. So just want to make that clear that this is one draft strategy that, yeah, we do think you can pull off if you're in the right position, the right players fall to you, but we're not necessarily putting this ahead of, other strategy types.
Yeah, I still prefer starting my drafts with a combo wide receiver, running back, whether it's the running back in the first round, the wide receiver, in the second. Typically, if I'm drafting at the top half of a draft, right, I'm trying to get JT or CMC if I can, and then come back with a receiver. But if I'm drafting towards the end, of the first round, I'm usually going receiver first and maybe coming back with a Barkley. So I still like those. It keeps you balanced, but I do think we've got a unique opportunity this year to go RB. It's not even just about being in the draft you're in. Every year is just a little bit different. And so we don't always get access to some of the profiles that are available right now in round 2 and round 3. A lot of times these are first round profiles, right? Or they're all jumbled up into the second round and we don't have any falling into the third round. We'll talk more about what those archetypes look like, but that's the key, right? Because that opportunity exists in 2022, it makes the 3 RB start possible. Obviously you got to understand your league format. If you're starting when we play FFPC, you start 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and you have 2 flex spots, right? So that just opens up even more flexibility for the way you may want to build your roster versus if you've got to start 3 wide receivers on only 1 flex. It changes things.
Again, top 3 points that Dwain makes at the beginning of the article, which you can find on pff.com. Running backs carry the highest ceilings, but we must focus on the right profiles and archetypes. We have several options that meet our profile criteria in rounds 2 and 3 this year, which doesn't occur every season. And based on current ADP, we have a lot of options to build out the rest of our roster at quarterback, receiver, and tight end. So, Dwain, one point you just made, though, is how things can change depending on your league and scoring type. With that said, having running backs just breaking fantasy football and things go right for them, that doesn't really change necessarily by the different league type. Now we know in standard running backs, we're going to more commonly populate, the top 12 overall scores versus PPR, but PPR, half PPR, standard, you found that regardless of that, man, the highest performing players in that tend to be running backs.
Yeah. So if you just look at the top 3 finishers across the, wide receiver, running back, tight end positions in PPR, 67% of them since 2011 have been running back. 33% have been wide receivers. So that tells you your top end outcomes, if you're really aiming for them, every year typically come from the running backs. 2 out of 3 players are going to be running backs. If you go to the top 5, it's 56%, 42%. Then in PPR, you see where the 0 RB draft could start to become valuable, because once you get inside the top 10, it flips. Wide receivers make up 54% of the group and running backs are only 41%. So that illustrates that sometimes there are too many running backs going in the first round. We know injuries and things like that play a role. We know that wide receivers typically don't have as many injuries. And that's why you will see some people start wide receiver, which, to your point, I cover in another article. Maybe we'll do a pod on that later. But once you get to half PPR, the top 3, 79%. So once you move from PPR to half PPR, you should care even more about running backs. And then to your point, once you're in standard, 91%, of the top 3 are running backs. Hell, in the top 25 in standard leagues, you're still leading running backs 56% to 40%. The other thing with this data that I just mentioned, I didn't even do that at points per game, Ian. I did it at just points. And the reason why is this is also factoring in that we got a lot of running backs to get hurt. It didn't matter. They still were the top. This is not just points per game. The best players, so the running backs that did stay healthy, still typically outscored the receivers. Now, you got to get them right. You don't want the hurt one. And that can be tough. That can be tough to pick out. So that's why 0RB is still valid, even though that that these data points play out. Like if you want to look at it though, even from a points per game in, like since 2011, we've seen 34 players eclipse 22 points per game in PPR, which is a really big score. 68% of those were running backs. So when we go to points per game, and we would expect that, right? Most people, I think, would expect there to be a bigger fall off from that 68% to the 67% when we remove points per game, right? Because running backs miss more games on average every single year. And that just wasn't the case. So you got to avoid the landmines, but the high ceiling upsides for running backs are typically just higher than wide receivers across all scoring formats.
And again, this is if you happen to go RB, but if it just makes more sense to go wide receiver early, you can break it up at that point. Because Dwain, it's not every year you have guys like Isaih Pacheco just waiting for you out there, someone that you can get, 30 guaranteed.
I don't even feel like I need to draft a running back until like round 12 anymore with Isaih Pacheco around.
just no RBs with no Isaih Pacheco.
Your Pacheco game was so on point yesterday. I had 3 that I had already thought of the night before. And when you started firing yours off, I was like, I'm not even doing any. Like Ian has got them all, and I loved yours. I just retweeted all yours, so I just pivoted. I just focused my attention on Bill Belichick yesterday. But yeah. So hey, just real quick, some people like to hear an illustration, right? Of this.
No, hold on. I have one more thing about Pacheco before we never talk
go.
about him again. Just it's so funny. And for the record, I'm not just completely out on Pacheco. I just find the hype that's coming purely from training camp to be absolutely ridiculous. Again, JJ Zacharyson, had a really good note in his late round just draft guide about the size speed kind of prospect comps that Pacheco has, and you go look at his Spark X score. I get it, the dude is an athletic specimen, and wouldn't be the first time for an unheralded guy out of Rutgers to maybe find a little more success, in more of a just good football environment. It's just the hype is so ridiculous to me. And Dwain, I tweeted out today, we had Nick Jacobs, the Chiefs reporter, tweet out 3 videos of Ronald Jones, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Isaih Pacheco. I watched them all. They're all just reasonable pass protection pickups and one-on-one. The Ronald Jones one has 6.4 thousand views. The Clyde Edwards-Helaire one has 10.6 thousand views. Isaih Pacheco, 117,000 views. It's just wild, man. And maybe it works out, but there still is a legit chance that Isaih Pacheco just doesn't even get a touch this season. It's madness to me. But now that I got that off my chest, Dwain, let's get back to
but to your point, people hear what they want. And I honestly, I wonder, when I saw those tweets come out, because I actually follow him, and I saw them all hit pretty much back to back to back. And my immediate thought was he performing some sort of social experiment where his hypothesis was that because Pacheco's so blazed right now, right? It's going to be like what you said. And it totally played out that way.
It worked.
People hear what they want, and people are searching for Pacheco all the time right now. And so anyway, yeah. So real quick, just to kind of illustrate the point we made earlier, and we'll jump into these profiles, but this perfect storm doesn't happen all the time. So in 2017, we got it. If you were drafting early, you had early position in your draft, you got to take Le'Veon Bell. In the second round, people were worried about Todd Gurley. We had Sean McVay coming in, but people were worried about Gurley, who played, after coming off of an injury in his rookie season. He had been hurt, the year before at Georgia. And so, it wasn't great. The yards per carry and things weren't there, but his overall profile was still really strong. That paired with the fact that there were rumors Lance Dunbar would steal the passing down work. Some of you folks remember this. Lance Dunbar is going to get all the receiving work. People just started fading early. He started falling into, the late second round. Then you have Spencer Ware go down. Kareem Hunt starts to climb up draft boards, but he never got he got up to third round. A lot of people got really nervous. He made it to the third round though, because back then, we had the Andy Reid, narrative. If you played running back for Andy Reid, and until Clyde Edwards-Helaire broke that, right? That used to be our narrative for Andy Reid. It was
Shady,
gold, it was
Jamal
a gold mine.
Charles, one after Brian Westbrook.
Yeah, Brian Westbrook.
Not just RB1s, the RB1 seemingly year after year after year.
But in that example, you could have started your draft with Le'Veon Bell. Okay, he fit a specific archetype. Pass catching back. You could have had Todd Gurley. Also a back that is explosive, more of the Javante Williams profile that we're talking about this year. And then you had a Kareem Hunt back, which is really more what we knew about Kareem Hunt then, we didn't know everything we know today. Like now we know he's this elite runner and pass receiving back. Back then we thought, hey, just at least an upside, running back in an offense that we really like. If you did that, you would have scored 1,030 PPR points just on those three players. That's 67.4 points per game just on those three. So when you can hit and you get two running backs right and you get a running back right in the flex, like, man, it's really hard for your league mates to overcome it. It doesn't, honestly, like, they've got to be super loaded to deal with that, even if the rest of your roster isn't that great. I mean, think about the scores that a lot of you know in your leagues, and then just imagine 67.4 right off the top every week out of three players. It's just huge. And that's why, going back to the ceilings, if you can hit, it's worth it. To Ian's point, doesn't mean you do it every draft. So let's talk about the profiles like that you want to look at. So you don't want to do this with just any three backs. So what I did is I went back, and I'm going to hit these things pretty quick. If you guys want to go back and see every detail, you can go check it out in the article. But essentially, I put together, this is what the 20-point per game running back profile looks like. I did exclude any backs that didn't play at least 14 games for this, going back to 2011. So number one is age. 21 of the 27, so 78% are 25 or younger. They, on average, they were 24.6 years old. So doesn't mean we can't take a guy that's 26 or 27. Just listen. But typically they are younger, right? So that's one criteria I was looking for. Passing game. They need to have a route to at least 50% of the routes. They need to have a route to 50% of the routes. That's funny. A path. They need a pathway to 50% of the routes. On average, those backs handled 62% of the passing downs, or not downs, but the routes on their team when their quarterbacks were throwing. Okay. So 1.30 yards per route run, 20% targets per route run. We're what we're looking for here. So then you look at the rushing game. On average, they handled 60% or more, or sorry, you wanted at least 81% of them handled 60% or more, average of 67%. 85% of them earned 60% or more of their attempts inside the 5. So what are we talking about? High leverage touches. Again, passing game, getting the carries inside the 5. This, in fact, is what sent Austin Eckler to the moon last year. He took over all of that work inside the 5 that he had never gotten before. We all knew he was a good receiving down back, but then he picked up the next thing that we want the most, which is the carries inside the 5. Then lastly, 22 out of 27, or 82% of these backs, best of the league average and explosive rush rate, which is 10.5%. And so on average, they hit 13%. So what are we looking for? We're looking for explosive playmakers. We'd like to know they have an opportunity to be on the field inside the 5. We really want them on the field for the passing game. So here's the tough part. We don't always know what their utilization is going to look like, which is why I also gave you the efficiency data points, because a lot of times we do have that. We can know, like, is the player actually explosive? Are they good in the passing game? Is, if they were to earn more routes, could they actually earn more targets? So you kind of got to put all the things together. But based on that, and I'll let you ask any questions you have here, Ian, or if I didn't clarify anything right. But those are the essential things you're looking for. A couple of exceptions that I just looked at. Any of the backs that missed that 50% route participation, guess what? They handle 70% plus of the work inside the 5. So you can be an either or. You'd rather a player be both. And then the other exception is, of all the backs that missed that 60% rush share that we talked about, they all were over 50% in route participation and over 50% in attempts inside the 5. So you don't necessarily have to be the bell cow in your offense as long as you're still getting the other high leverage, touches. So that's the essential profile for the 20-point plus RB profile before we jump into the names.
Dwain, I'm happy you just spoke it out and you describe it here. Again, it's easier to go in and just list here are my favorite RBs this year, because they're all really good, and their ADP isn't that far from where I'm ranking them anyway. But this is the sort of I think work that maybe doesn't fit into a thread, but it is sort of essential to actually building a profile of a prospect, really attacking those three kind of pillars: the opportunity, the talent, and the offensive environment. There, you could argue that, strength of schedule, matchups and stuff kind of goes into the fourth pillar, but obviously with the running back, just, really lean more and more into opportunity and team environment. And before we get into the actual season, we've talked about just the difficulties in trying to project strength of schedule too far into the future. So now, Dwain, we are looking for younger running backs that have been really good and look like they're going to have a really good opportunity. I mean, at its core, that's what we're trying to target, but
not rocket science, is it?
It's not rocket science, but this goes back to your original point, where these guys usually aren't really available in rounds 2 or 3, because if they're checking all these boxes, everyone realizes it because it isn't exactly rocket science, and they are actually usually gone inside the first 12 picks. Luckily, Dwayne, we have some of those guys: Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Austin Eckler, Dalvin Cook. They basically qualify in round 1. Rounds 2 and 3, though, this is why we're feeling confident about the RB start, because all those factors we just talked about, we actually have some qualifiers in rounds 2 and round 3.
Yeah, and I think the number one name that sticks out is Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
And what's funny with Saquon is most people know. I mean, I think most people will admit, like, Saquon's going to start the year as the every down option on this team. But why we're getting the discount is people can't get past the fact that Saquon has burned them in the past. He's cost them a first or a second round pick for multiple years, and he's been hurt. And so people really struggle to get that out of their mind. And that's why we're getting this discount this year. Guess what? If Saquon blows up this year, next year, what's going to happen? One, Saquon's moving up the board. And number two, people are going to worry less about a back that profiles similarly to him in round 2 if they had an injury the year before, because what will they do? But look at Saquon last year. He did it, and he was hurt. We just live in a repeat cycle, right? Where these little mini narratives like repeat themselves over and over, and all we really remember are the last 2 years, and that's why you're getting a discount on Saquon. Like you mentioned earlier, we don't need to cover everything about Saquon. We've covered him at length. You guys can go check the article out. But look, explosive playmakers, going to catch passes. The biggest question I think you could ask about Saquon, and Evan asked us about this, is just, do we really think the explosiveness is still there? And we can't say for sure. But look, man, at age 25, I'm betting that yes, that his explosiveness is going to return.
What explosiveness did Najee Harris have last season? And it didn't matter because of the overwhelming volume attached to it. That's my main point with Saquon.
Well, that's the floor with Saquon, right? As long as he's not hurt, you get. Honestly, I think you're getting Najee's floor. Even if he's not explosive, but if his explosiveness does return, you get CMC.
And I'm not trying to shit on Najee. I know that the offensive line had issues.
Me do that, but
yeah, right. No, but exactly what you're saying. Like, and people, I was joking on Twitter how, like, you're never really excited to hit draft now on Najee in the first round. But hey, it certainly didn't kill your fantasy team last year. Maybe didn't win you the title, but man, if that's the floor for a second round running back, Dwayne, just on volume alone, like, it's going to be hard for anyone with a pulse, man. You get them over 300 touches, they're probably going to return top 12 running back value.
Yeah, for sure. So, and that's the thing I love about Barkley, honestly. I love drafting Saquon Barkley in round 2 because of that. So the next guy would be DeAndre Swift. Most of you know about Swift. You know how good he is in the passing game. You also know that he's an explosive playmaker, so we don't need to really recap all those things. But his targets per route, like, they're really good, like just below like the Kamara CMC levels, 24% and 25% 2 years in a row. So this wasn't just a flash. Like, he's really good in the receiving game. They like to use him there. The biggest obstacle for Swift is, can he really have the carries inside the 5? Last year, we never really honestly got a clear beat on it because he and Jamal, one, they didn't get a ton of opportunities inside the 5. Number two, when they did, they typically were not healthy together. So it's not like for sure that role belongs to Jamal Williams, because we've seen teams like the Saints in the past. Dan Campbell roots with what? The Saints. We've seen teams like the Saints in the past, even though they had Mark Ingram and Kamara was really the passing down back. We've seen those years where Kamara still got most of the work inside the 5. So that could happen for DeAndre Swift. But that's the thing he needs to really click big. Like, I think we feel confident he's going to be an explosive player. Feel confident we're going to get the receiving down work. Feel confident there's probably going to be a lot of game scripts that make DeAndre Swift really good, just like what we saw last year. But if the Lions are more competitive, what does Jamal Williams get? If he steals those carries inside the 5, that's the potential, kind of a trapdoor floor, to use a Matt Waldmanism, on DeAndre Swift.
We did see last season in the 10 games that both guys were pretty much healthy, Williams had a slight lead over Swift in goal line carries, 5 versus 4. But I'm honestly fine with like sort of a 50-50 split with that, Dwayne, because if we really, obviously we want those high leverage touchdowns near the goal line, but if Swift can just keep dominating the targets, like, that's what's going to really help us here in full PPR. And that's what happened in 10 full games with them healthy. We've both been screaming Jamal Williams' praise all offseason. I remember originally going into the Lions preview and expecting to be lower on Swift than a lot of other people, just because of how much respect I had for Jamal Williams. But man, even in the 10 games with all of them fully healthy, Swift 66% snaps, Jamal 35%. The rush attempts were even, 1 103 versus 102. The targets, though, 62 versus 22, man. Swift, 18 PPR points per game, even with Williams healthy, 17 expected PPR points per game. So that's why I like to look at expected, and guys like, Debo and Jonathan Taylor or Nick Chubb and some of these guys that maybe don't have the most fantasy-friendly role. Like, Swift doesn't even need to be a superstar, man, as long as they keep peppering him with those targets. Dwayne, did you watch the first episode of Hard Knocks? I'm still behind, but I think
I haven't watched it yet.
Okay, we'll talk about it another time. But I think our Jamal Williams value is quickly going to be drying up here.
Yeah.
Do not let that distract from everything that Swift can bring to the table, though.
So not quite Jamal Williams, but another Williams with a J in the beginning. Javante Williams is the next back. Still going in round 2. He is slipping a little bit right now in ADP because of all the talk really right now with Melvin Gordon. And all I'm going to say about that is Melvin Gordon is still a good back, right? So it's totally possible that we see a 50-50 split. I'm still betting on like 60-40. It was honestly more 55-45 down the stretch last year at the end of the year. So I think Javante Williams takes another small step forward. I think that's reasonable. He could still get to 65%, I think. But the biggest thing you're doing with Williams is he's 22. And when you look at his missed tackles forced per attempt, 31%. That's plus 14% versus the NFL average. Yards after contact, almost a half yard above the NFL average. And then explosive rush rate, he's above the NFL average. In fact, like if you just profile him, he looks like Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb. Now, really smart film folks will show you that, Javante Williams maybe isn't as good as Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb. And guess what? That's okay. Those are two of the best running backs in the league. And I think there are arguments, and I saw it on the film too with Williams where vision, I was like, he probably could have just gone inside and got an easy 30, but he went outside and broke 17 tackles for, 20. So, but at the end, the way I look at that as well, until someone tells me that vision can improve, I look at it as just another skill that these guys are trying to work on. Because remember, when you play in college, and every level it changes, right? In high school, if you're eventually in the NFL one day, basically you were an absolute god. If you were in the NFL one day, in high school you were a god. College, maybe you weren't a god, but you were like maybe God's child, or something, I mean, you still had
Jesus. Is that what you're looking for, Dwayne?
Yeah. Well, no, I was going to go with like Achilles, right? Okay. So you still have you've got a weakness maybe somewhere in your game. It can be exposed occasionally, but if you're going to the NFL and you're going to be an early round pick like these guys, you can still beat people to the corner, Ian. You can do weird things and make people miss. So I never want to discount a back's ability to actually improve in that area, right? And that's the one thing whenever I see that kind of analysis, and I'll always ask the question. I'll say, okay, I see what you're talking about, but is vision static? Just like, some things are static, right? And if someone were to give me really good research around that, I would love to see it. But like speed's kind of static, right? You can only improve it so much. Like burst is kind of static. You can only improve it so much. There are other things you can continue to get better on. So the way I look at Williams is, well, what if he improves his vision? What if the reason he didn't have great vision is he never freaking needed it in college because he was just a hoss? So I think those are all the factors. But at the end of the day, just love the profile. The upside is huge. If something were to happen to Melvin Gordon, or they just decide we're going to give the guy 65% of the offense. And remember, folks, it's a way better offense. We have Russell Wilson.
Yep.
So and I'm seeing a lot of stuff out there like Melvin Gordon's taking over the passing downs. I mean, is he? I haven't read that. I've read that speculation. I've read that speculated in articles. I've not seen one quote saying that Melvin Gordon's handling the passing down role. So we just don't really know that. But at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to stand in Javante's way is his utilization. Everything else lines up really well. Again, this is where you have to remember that ceiling.
Yeah.
Remember, you got to remember the ceiling. I mean, people even back in the day with, Kareem Hunt, there were folks worried about, well, when Spencer Ware, comes back, even though I think his knee injury was season ending, but there's all sorts of weird noise people are going to give you around it. But the profile we've seen with Javante
had the 13th most touches in the NFL last year. And a little bit of that was him playing 17 games with some of the guys around him not being quite as healthy. But there seems to be this, Dwayne, we're holding this against Javante, that he's not the featured workhorse back in his backfield. And again, we're in round 2, usually round 3, when we can actually get Javante. Look at every other running back going around him. There's a couple guys that we think maybe could get that. Cam Akers to an extent. Honestly, that late though, Everyone has multiple running backs in their backfield. So, like, I don't want to just hold that. Yeah, Melvin Gordon's there, but A.J. Dillon's there for Aaron Jones. Nick Chubb's got to deal with Kareem Hunt or Dearness Johnson. Travis Etienne's going to have to deal with James Robinson, Breece Hall, Michael Carter, Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard. Like, Javante Williams isn't the only running back in the league with a little bit of competition in his own backfield. I wish it was 2000, Dwayne, when we had 19 different running backs eclipse 300 touches. But in 2021 and 2020 alike, there were only 4. So, man, if we're going to have a running back, like almost every other running back in the league, dividing up their touches, we might as well take the guy that we know can make a hell of a lot happen with him.
Yeah, and I think the other point is opportunity cost, right? Once you get, when Javante goes in the middle of the second round, like, I get it with people, right? Because I'm going to take Barkley over Javante. Like, I'm just going to do it. So it's really hard. I don't get Javante very much in the middle of the second round, and there's a lot of aggressive drafters that will now take him there. We didn't have that earlier in the offseason. So when you can get him down, like at the end, at the turn, or you get him coming back around in the third round, to me, that's where the opportunity cost starts to change. You don't have a Barkley anymore, right? You're now looking at receivers that we've talked about that we like, but all of them also have some slight questions around them, right? We're no longer getting the CeeDee Lamb's gone, right? You're not getting CeeDee Lamb anymore. So you're moving into a tier of players where all of them, mostly have good talent profiles and have some sort of question right around them. So for me, when that gets there, I'm like, well, give me the position with the highest ceiling. And that's where Javante really comes into play for me.
Like, it's never going to end, though. Even if Javante just gets an 80-20 split, there's going to be people wanting 90-10. Like, and we do this too, Dwayne. But I remember last year, like, the first 5-6 weeks of the year, like, Jonathan Taylor's usage, like, really wasn't good. And then they changed it, and they really started giving him more of a true 3-down role. Marlon Mack became just a weekly healthy scratch. Naeem Hines wasn't even getting all the pass down work. But even throughout that, Dwayne, we're looking at games where it's like, man, 27 touches. That's the best you could do there for Jonathan Taylor. So I just, again, make sure with all this stuff.
Jonathan Taylor is the proof case here that if you just want to look back 1 year and remember the most recent thing that will make you do this is essentially Jonathan Taylor's profile. That's what we're dealing with, right? Remember, Naeem Hines is an elite receiving down back. A big part of how Jonathan Taylor stayed on the field is the Colts led all the time, right? It worked out in his favor, but it could work out in Javante Williams' favor the same way. And talent has a funny way of being able to correct some of these ills, right? Even if you've got to be able to share some time. So that's the thing you got to remember with Williams. You could be getting this year's Jonathan Taylor. And again, if you're worried about the vision thing, honestly, if Williams gets 65%, I don't even think his vision matters. I think he's going to be a top 5 back. If somehow he improved his vision, and he's a better NFL running back, then he has even more upside in my mind. So I like Williams, and I'm hoping that all this news, because it's pretty heavy, I'm hoping this news continues to push him down where we can just consistently get him in the third round. Like the next guy we want to talk about, Ian, Travis Etienne.
Real quick, though. What are we even talking about division for? And real football fans, like I love Matt Waldman's analysis. Spoiler, I think he's going to be talking to us next week. That's going to be fantastic. But man, this is just the shit that we always bring up in February through July, and then August, 10th comes around, and it's like, well, okay, my model might be saying that, Javante's vision is lacking, but did you guys see the training camp report on Isaih Pacheco? Like, it's just one of those things where I fully understand as someone that played some running back, and I had terrible vision, man. If you told me to run the A gap and there was 4 yards available, I got you 4, maybe 5 yards. If there was 0 yards, I'm not getting you -5 yards, but I'm also not going to exactly find where the other.
So they never called you corner store. You weren't a threat to be the corner store guy. I got you.
I think I bounced outside like once or twice. It was always just
Ian was never called 7-Eleven.
Never, not even if there's a fire. I just think that these are things that matter, but man, let's take the guy that's probably going to be seeing 15 to 20 touches inside of a really good offense. Like, we don't need to be overthinking this all the time. But now, Dwayne, the next guy, Travis Etienne, you still have as a round 3 player. I'll tell you what, man, the way things are moving with James Robinson looking good, and I think people just being unsure of the situation, I wouldn't even be surprised if we start seeing Etienne slipping to round 4.
Yeah, so in home leagues, and it's always good for us to clarify this, and so I'm glad you brought it up that way, because we get a lot of questions about this, like making sure we're referencing both, like when we're doing the shows, and sometimes I forget. But in sharper leagues, going in round 3. Right now, he's like round 3, pick 4 at FFPC. You and I have been fortunate. We've got him at 3.8 and 3.10 twice. Like, that's one of the biggest comments I get about our drafts. We're like, God, how do you guys keep getting Etienne like to fall to you at that pick? But in home leagues, So ESPN, Yahoo, and based on the queue and the way the ranks are currently set up, and the drafts that we do have that are setting up the ADP, like Etienne goes in round 4, and on ESPN, dude, like he was at pick 72 as of like last Friday. So I don't know what's going on, and I don't know if you can honestly get him there. I was asking some people, I'm like, do you guys really get him? Because I don't draft on ESPN. I was like, do you guys really get him at pick 72? And some people came back and were basically like, we just tried to take him by like round 4 or 5. So bottom line, to your point, he can be there in round 4 in those formats. But Etienne, I thought your tweet earlier honestly summed up everything. And it was your tweet that, hey, Jacksonville lost the game by 17 points. Etienne only had 9 carries for 40 yards, but he had 7 catches for 63 yards and a touchdown. Like that's the point.
Yep.
This is an archetype. Yeah. This is an archetype that we know he's going to get the passing down work, right? We know he's explosive. That's what we're looking for. And that just insulates you in so many ways. It means if your offense is bad, but you're explosive, you can score touchdowns from far out, right? So you still can score touchdowns. You don't have to have carries inside the 5. You can still get the carries inside the 5, but then the other part is if you are going to be trailing all the time, we're going to be like DeAndre Swift, right? Etienne's going to be on the field. He's going to be catching the passes. Trevor Lawrence had the number 1 check down rate in the NFL last year. Doesn't mean it stays that way. He also had this thing called receivers not getting open. So that can be a challenge as well. But there's just so much to love about Etienne. And I think, that's really it in the nutshell. He has the profile we're looking for. Going to get the passing down work. He's explosive playmaker. What if the Jaguars somehow do take a step forward, right? And they're a little bit better. And now he gets more touchdown upside. I just feel like Travis, it's funny because I hear a lot of folks like on social media. And the thing I'll hear is, man, Travis Etienne, he's just such a thin bet. And what people mean by thin bet, they think there's no margin for error with where you're getting him in round 3. I'm the total opposite. I think you're buying him at his floor in round 3 because of what he's going to do in the passing game work, right? Assuming he doesn't get hurt. Because my projection for Etienne, my ranking of Etienne assumes that James Robinson's getting like half the carries.
Yeah.
And Travis Etienne's still grading as a round 3 back. So I feel like folks that say he's thin, they're double counting. They haven't really probably gone through the legwork of really thinking through where Etienne fits. What kind of profile does he have? What profiles historically have hit for us and hit these big outcomes? I think once you piece, and not to say these other people aren't smart, they really are. And maybe they have something I haven't thought about. But once you piece the whole profile together, it's really, really hard to not smash Travis Etienne every time he's there in round 3.
We got those reports last summer that Urban Meyer was just having Etienne straight up practice with the wide receivers. And I still think people's brains like are in a pretzel from trying to like decipher what that meant and stuff. Like, Dwayne, we were getting summer reports like, could a Deebo Samuel role be on the table for Travis Etienne? He's a running back, and he's actually an explosive 3-down option that we saw do it at Clemson, man. Like, this is not Nyheim Hines or J.D. McKissick out here. Like, the best case scenario for Etienne is not the Deebo Samuel role. It's the Christian McCaffrey never leave the field because you don't have to role. And it sure seems like something like DeAndre Swift, man. I think the worst case scenario, man, is probably something like what Chase Edmonds was giving us last season, where shitty touchdown luck. It's an offense that does a good job maybe getting him the ball in space and everything, but we just don't see, maybe the chunk touchdowns we were hoping for, and we get like a low end kind of PPR specific RB2. That's not going to completely kill you, and the upside is just so much more here. I continue to get all the Travis Etienne anytime he's there late end of round 3.
And not to go on a big tangent, but like what you said just there, honestly, like if I had to pick one back that goes later that's potentially the Etienne arbitrage play, you named him. It's Chase Edmonds.
Ooh, yeah. That's one of the, and actually Dwayne and I will record this podcast next, but there are a handful of backfields in the preseason where it's like, let's find out if there's going to be 2 or 3 running backs involved. Because I mean, there is a chance in Miami if we go ahead and see Chase Edmonds is the one, Raheem Mostert, spelling him as an early down option. There's only 2 running backs there, man. That's fantastic. The problems will come if Sony Michel and Myles Gaskin and whoever else is on that roster at the moment, turn this into a 3 or 4 headed committee. But hey, people that can catch the ball and then go make big plays, Dwayne, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yep. PPR, half PPR, especially if you're looking at Etienne in a standard league, it's fine to bump him down a little bit, but remember, still running backs still dominate that. The challenge is more of his points are going to come from the catches than some of the other backs. So like in a format like that, you move a player like Nick Chubb. So right now I will take Travis Etienne over Nick Chubb in a PPR.
Yeah.
But if you put me in a standard league, I'm all day taking Nick Chubb over Travis Etienne. So that's the other part where you got to know your just got to know your format.
Side note, Dwayne, have you ever played in a points per carry league? Because I get questions on these sometimes, and I haven't. I would hate myself if I did. Like, what are we doing rewarding a point for a carry? It doesn't take actual skill.
I do get those questions. I usually, sorry y'all, I just don't answer them. I don't know what answer to. I don't have enough. I just haven't thought through it enough. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward, but yeah, I don't like the idea either.
It just makes me nervous. All right, Dwayne, we do have 2 honorable mentions here, just due to an age thing, and
that's the only reason.
Right. So Leonard Fournette, 27, Alvin Kamara, 27, still guys that, we're not saying fade by any stretch of the imagination. And just because we haven't named someone here doesn't mean that, we're fading that player. Again, don't hate the player, hate the ADP. Just Dwayne, in terms of just checking as many boxes as possible, it's going to go ahead and be Travis Etienne, Javante Williams, DeAndre Swift, Saquon Barkley. Those are the rounds 2 and 3 targets if they fall in the right spot.
Right. Yeah, and Fournette and Kamara are fine. They can be part of that mix. They can be part of an RB build. Like, I'm not as crazy about Mixon. I'm not there are backs that I'm not as crazy about that I did leave out of the article. Doesn't mean you have to be a full-on fade with them, but they don't fit this particular profile. So Fournette, the challenge for him is he just, it's the age isn't a killer. Like, I've gone back now and looked at all these players. There's a lot of guys that produce at age 27. So I'm not saying he's at a cliff. He just didn't meet the criteria from, those huge seasons that we had seen. And it kind of matches what we've seen with his underlying talent profile. Like, it's good, but not great, right? Fournette's not like this hyper explosive player, but on the Bucs, man, you could score 20 rushing touchdowns. So, I mean, there's different ways to get there. And the only reason we're getting a discount on Kamara is people are uncertain, right? Yep. They just don't know what's happening. So you're just buying the discount on the uncertainty around the legal case with Kamara.
To end the lovely article that, again, you can find on PFF.com, Dwayne goes through early position builds, middle position builds, and late position builds, rounds 1 through 9, just showing that you can go RB, and still have plenty of wide receiver, tight end, and quarterback talent available in these ranges. I mean, Dwayne, and we've talked about it, really rounds 7 through 11, if you wanted to stretch it more, there's still viable players at each and every position out there. So it really is. I was talking to Justin Herzig about this, Best Ball Mania winner a couple years ago. So it's different with Underdog, but sometimes people have these certain builds stuck in their head. Like, you need to have 2 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 7 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. It's more of a best ball thing. But the thing Justin and I were talking about, man, like, people will take one look at the final build numbers and, like, it could be like a round 17 decision that, like, made sense, but because now you have one less wide receiver than you were hoping for, people are looking at it funky when it could have been, between Zay Jones and like Deontay Foreman or something like that. I think it's more important, Dwayne, to have your lineup thresholds for like the end of round 11, because once you get to a certain point in the late rounds, like, what are we even doing here? We can't feel nearly as confident about those guys having the right amount of players at the right positions in rounds 1 through 9, rounds 1 through 11. To me, that's far more important to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think the cutoffs are huge. And I like round 11 because you could still be taking a starter in round 11, like at quarterback. We did it the other night in an FFPC draft. This doesn't mean you have to fill out your starting lineup, with your first 8 picks or your first 7 picks, depending on what your lineups need. You may not address quarterback or tight end until round 10 and 11. Like, they're just different ways, and it depends on how your board is falling. So, yeah, and just like as far as these builds, you folks can go look at them. But at the end of the day, especially over in the home leagues, man, Allen Robinson still going in round 6, Michael Thomas going in round 7, Rashad Bateman going in freaking round 8, Kadarius Toney going in round 9. You probably don't need me to say anything else. Jerry Jeudy going in round 6, Marquise Brown going in round 5, Cortland Sutton going in round 5. Man, if in these other leagues, like, you can't pull this off in like FFPC or Underdog. Like, you can't get all of those receivers. You can still pull this build off, but you can't get all that talent that we just talked about. So if you're in a home league, like, man, you can just completely smash still at wide receiver, even after you start with the 3 running backs.
We'll give a quick shout out to some sponsors. Manscaped, the leader in below the waist grooming. Now trust them with the whole shebang. Join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with the code PFF. Again, that's 20% off and free shipping with the code PFF on manscaped.com. It's time you enjoyed the finer things in life and get yourself a platinum package for your platinum package. Also, I'll give a shout out to Underdog Fantasy, the best place to play fantasy football this summer is Underdog Fantasy. Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100 when you you sign up with the promo code PFF. And guess what? Play just $10 of those dollars using promo code PFF, and you get a free PFF subscription. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to underdogfantasy.com or the App Store. Play $10 with code PFF and draft your best ball mania team today. And hey, speaking of PFF, right now you can get 25% off any PFF subscription if you use code FANTASY. All of PFF's locked article content, football, fantasy football rankings, projections, data and grades, all that and so much more. Support the pod and use promo code FANTASY for 25% off any sub. And finally, if you're still into the NFT thing, the next generation of fantasy sports is here. Download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now. Sign up with promo code PFF. Click the Rainmakers tile and opt in to get your first card free. Plus, play for millions in prizes all football season while building the ultimate NFT fantasy franchise with Rainmakers Football. As promo code PFF. Build, play, win. Only at DraftKings. Contest entries dependent on type and number of NFTs held. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. I always feel like, Dwayne, if I get canceled or I just lose everything in my life, man, I can just be one of those people in the commercials who talks really fast and says the disclaimer shit at the end. So, we got backup options in life, man. You got to feel good about that at least. Anything else you want to get off your chest, Mr. McFarland? Again, people can find your running back, wide receiver strategy articles at pff.com. I'm guessing you are not done with this series.
No. We're going to be hitting the wide receivers. We're going to be continuing to talk about all the different builds. So, but nothing else for this one. We're in a good spot.
I'm happy to say, Dwayne, that we proved it's possible that we can actually cover a topic in depth and not talk for over an hour. So going to try to keep that sort of tempo going here with some of these strategy articles. Hope you guys have been enjoying the guests we've had on. We're going to continue to do some of the live drafts, mixing in some other stuff as well. August 10th, man, just about a month away from actual live professional NFL football being back. It's a great day to be great. For Dwayne, I'm Ian. Thanks so much for tuning in to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And until next time, take care. Goodbye.